Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studio, it's time for Family Business Radio. Showcasing outstanding family businesses and the advisors who assist them.
Good afternoon. You're listening to another episode of Family Business Radio. I'm your host, Anthony Chen. Today we have two great guests with us. We're going to be focusing around this topic and discussion of culture, business culture, and family businesses. Our first guest today is Peter Tarantino with CPA Tarantino. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Hi, good afternoon.
Great. Well, as with all shows and our guests, we always like to start with their origin story as to how you became a CPA and what got you into being motivated to create and form your own business.
Well, I guess the best piece of advice I got was from my father, who worked in construction. He said, whatever career path you choose, make sure that you're working inside during the winter. So,
good advice.
Without a doubt. And, you know, having grown up in New York, winters are cold. So being inside is great. I had taken bookkeeping as an elective in high school. And the teacher said I seemed to have a knack for what I was doing and suggested that I consider it as a career path.
Mm-hmm. Now, I understand coming in from New York, what brought you from New York, from cold of New York now to the warm side of Georgia?
Primarily quality of life. My first son was born in November of 98, and I was working, 8 hours a day and traveling 4 hours a day back and forth to Manhattan to service my clients. And the quality of life was horrible. I was making a good living, but I was never home, and that wasn't good. So we had an opportunity to consider leaving New York, and Atlanta seemed like a great place to be. We had some family who had relocated here, and the economy was very similar to New York, although a lot less expensive. Mm-hmm. So it was just an easy decision to make.
How was it kind of that transition point?
Well, the logistics of moving a business weren't as difficult as what I like to say is the fitting in. I have that funny northern accent, although I don't really hear it. And I had no network here. When I came here, I didn't know anybody. I had nobody to refer my clients to for things that they needed, and had nobody to refer clients to me. So it was a little challenge, developing that network. But once I did, it was fantastic.
And how has that move influenced your current outlook and the way that you build your business now?
Well, one of the things, having moved a business, it did offer me some unique insight that I hadn't had before. So now when I've got clients who are doing that, it's great to be in a position to give them some advice on some of the pitfalls that they may face. I'm not against moving a business, but there are things that you just don't think about until you actually do it. So it gave me an interesting perspective.
Kind of like what you mentioned about the quality of life, where you can't really put that on a spreadsheet.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. There's no numbers for that.
Mm-hmm. Now, talking about businesses moving, do you find also a lot of business now moving into Georgia kind of with the same concerns?
What I find is many of the clients that I served in New York are now relocating. Over the last 20 years that I'm here, I've probably half of my business clients in New York have left. Those who don't have to physically be present in New York are leaving. And you read every day in the paper about businesses relocating to the South. Quality of life, cost of living, those are all great things.
Well, I think also kind of their CPA also helped them along with that.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Now, I understand that you're now completing your 33rd tax season. Well, so you probably started, in elementary school?
No. I'm a lot older than I look. Just finished our 33rd tax season. Certainly markedly different than it used to be. I mean, when I started in this profession, there was no e-filing. Mm-hmm. Everything was done on paper. So the practice obviously was smaller. Now it's much larger. It's much easier to meet clients, and it's a lot easier to do business in multiple states. I mean, we now have got clients in over 20 states and on 2 continents, which was not possible when I first started in this profession.
Mm. Now, as a business owner, how would they go about finding a trustworthy receipt? Because if someone would just go on Google, there's a bajillion search results. What is it that makes you stand out? Well,
as a general rule, most of our clients come from referral. I've developed a network of professionals in financial advisory, in banking, in attorneys, various different professions, and they refer clients to us, plus existing clients. Not very often do we get a client from a Google web search or something that turns out to be a good client. What I found with most of those people is they're just shopping for a transaction as opposed to a relationship.
Now, when talking about the difference between transactions and relationships, when you bring a client to your practice, what is it that key things that you kind of look for?
Well, one of the things I look for when I meet a new client is how long of a relationship have they had with my predecessor, and why is that relationship ending? Most of the time that relationship is ending because they feel that they've either been underserved or the professional's didn't do the right job. The other thing we look for, we always ask for 2 years of tax returns, and I like to see if it was the same preparer 2 years in a row. And that's a great way to find out if somebody's just shopping for a transaction. It takes a long time to bring in a new client. I want to bring in a client that's going to stay a while. I still have clients today that were with me when I started in practice in 1986. Granted, not as many as I used to, but there are still clients there. There's a certain longevity. There's a family type relationship that exists with those clients. So it's hard to break those ties.
You're talking about relationships. Now, how does someone as a business know whether or not they're being underserved?
Usually it's when they get a notice in the mail from the IRS or the state that they live in.
Okay.
They'll, a lot of times I'll hear a client will call me and say, I was talking to so-and-so and he said that his CPA told him this or that. And, those clients, those relationships and those conversations go on with other people and they realize, oh, well, I'm not my client. My CPA never told me about that. I mean, the biggest transition for us was with the new tax law change that started in 2018. I was surprised by how many new clients I met who told me their current CPA didn't tell them anything at all about how the new tax law was going to affect them. And I managed to get a lot of referrals out of that because people talk in the golf clubs and they talk in restaurants and they talk in the dentist's office, and word gets out.
Well, I guess kind of piggybacking off of that is, what are the kind of the top 2 or 3 things that a business owner that will be listening to the show that should be listening out for, that are probably just don't know, that they're not getting advice on, that you can shed some light on?
Well, one of the things that we do regularly is with our business clients, they may not be in touch with us during the year, but usually if we haven't heard from them in October and November, we'll start to call and reach out to them to see how's business doing, what do your numbers look like through the first 3 quarters of the year, and figure out, do we have a tax problem that we have to deal with? Is there something that we can do before the end of the year to mitigate that tax liability? Maybe it's buy a new piece of equipment that you were planning on, or undertaking a marketing adventure, or maybe increasing the contribution to the retirement plans. So we try to be more proactive with clients so that they feel like they're being served, because that's what they want. If they just want tax preparation, Jackson Hewitt, H&R Block, those are great resources for them. We prefer to be proactive rather than reactive.
So it's not just kind of a bookkeeping service you provide. You look into planning way before, and in terms of it, preventing potential problems.
Correct. Yeah. We want to be a trusted advisor. We want to walk the walk with the client.
Now, you talk about all these kinds of relationship building. What is kind of a specific field, if there is one, that you like focusing on?
We don't have any specific area of practice that we focus on. I will say that the majority of our clients are service-based businesses, not very many manufacturing businesses. And a lot of those clients are actually family-run businesses where you've got 1, 2, and sometimes 3 generations of family working in the business. And those are an interesting challenge because, if somebody comes out of high school and then goes to work with mom and dad, they don't really have a sense of what the rest of the real world is like. And I always advise clients, if their son or daughter is going to enter the business, I always tell them, have them go out and work for somebody else in this field so that they can get an understanding of everything that goes on. Because moms and dads, and, I put myself in that same category, we tend to try and make it easy for our children, and we're doing them a disservice. So with the family businesses, that's one of the things we preach is that's not your son when he comes to work. And we tell the kids too, that's not mom and dad. That's the boss. And, you have to be held to the same standards as everybody else. And sometimes you end up being part therapist and part certified public accountant.
So you have 2 businesses. You have an accounting practice and a therapist.
Right. Yeah. I just wish I could bill through the medical insurance for the therapy part.
So with that big advice, what other key advice would you like to also share with other family businesses who are, as you mentioned, 2nd or 3rd generation coming in? Well,
the biggest thing I see is a lack of succession planning. Many times the people that I'm working with, the people who started the business, have this assumption that the next generation A, wants to be in the business, and B, wants to take it over. And many times that's not the case. And mom and dad get into their 80s and they can't really work anymore. And little Johnny has no interest in being a boss. He was happy coming in 40 hours a week, getting his paycheck and going home and, dealing with his family. He has no interest in running the business and being a boss. And then all of a sudden there's nobody there to steer the ship.
Mm. Now, with difficult conversations like that, do typically clients try to somewhat bring it up to you, or is it something that you have to bring it up into their attention?
Almost always we have to initiate that conversation. They've got a thing in their head about, what they're doing in their business and what's going to happen next. And they don't have those conversations. And they're not easy conversations to have. They're certainly not conversations that you have around the Thanksgiving or Christmas table. Those are conversations that you have to close the door and discuss in great detail, and nobody leaves until the issues are worked out. The other problem with it is everybody brings their baggage to the table, especially if you've got brothers and sisters working for mom and dad. They always bring their childhood issues. He got a bike for Christmas and I only got a doll. and those conversations, they just become more difficult.
So you hear that, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Well, then not just being an accountant in practice, you actually help then, from the sounds of it, have that difficult conversation. Do you also kind of handhold in terms of the whole succession process from one generation?
Yeah, I mean, as a general rule, we'll do the hand holding, but we don't. The succession planning is kind of an art form in and of itself, and we have people that we refer out that help with the actual details of the succession planning. We'll help on the tax side. What's the most tax efficient way to transfer ownership of the business from mom and dad to the next generation, or maybe it's skipping a generation. That's the part we get involved in. Otherwise, we bring advisors to the table that help with the actual legalities.
Mm. Well, having seen all different sides from the younger and the founding generation, when should the business owners begin thinking about something like succession planning?
Usually when the business is having a very good year. Too often, people who are considering selling a business, and this is even if they're not, in a family-run business, they wait until business is bad to think about, how do I get out? When do I sell? The time to think about selling the business or planning to transition it to the next generation is when you're having a good year. Because that's when things are easier to discuss when business is good. When business is bad, it's very hard to have those conversations. And that's the part that the second generation that may want to, you may want to take over the business, they're not interested. If they see mom and dad struggling financially, they say, well, why do I want to buy this business? I'll just, we'll ride it out. When it closes, we'll go get jobs. And that's not always so easy too, because they're used to being treated very well by mom and dad. Mm-hmm. When they get to the real world and have to answer to a boss, it's difficult.
That's kind of where your first advice came in, is first work out in the real world, then come into family.
Absolutely.
Business. Now, I guess then follow-up question with that is there a time frame in terms of recommendation as to how long they should be working outside before coming into the family business?
At a minimum, a year. 18 months is more ideal, but a minimum of a year working for somebody else, just to get through a complete operating cycle in that particular business.
Yeah. Then to get a bit more on a personal side, or you can leave names out, would be, have you seen the fruits of labor where your clients have actually taken your advice and then looking back, that actually worked out even better?
Yeah, no, we've seen both. I don't want to talk about the ones that didn't do well. The thing with clients is, you can lead a horse to water and you can't make them drink. It's terrible when it doesn't go the way you had recommended, but you really can't tell the client, I told you so. So at the end of the day, I'm a capitalist. I want to get paid for the work that I do. And if the client doesn't take my advice, it's really up to them. I can't really force them.
So you talked a lot about advising families, not just as a bookkeeper, but also planning ahead, and also looking in terms of succession planning on good years. And if their next generation of family wants to come into the business, but first work outside about 18 months, as you mentioned. Any other big tidbits or perhaps mistakes or red flags that you see a lot of family businesses make that you wish that had I been there before, they would have been able to avoid that?
I think the biggest thing is a failure to plan. They don't plan for next month. They don't plan for next week, and they don't plan for next year. And that can be the death knell of any business, whether it's family owned or not. Every business has a natural operating cycle. Every business has a period of time where they have a downturn, whether it be economic conditions outside or loss of a vital supply source or loss of a big customer. If they don't plan for those eventualities, it's a problem. Too many business owners spend 100% of what they make and just assume that the money's going to keep rolling in, and that's a problem.
So kind of setting something aside for a rainy day fund,
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Well, then kind of somewhat dipping our toe on that, because with the whole business environment where the R word now, people kind of whispering around, and don't know what your take on it, but if a business owner is concerned about that, what would be your advice to them?
Well, they need to look at overhead and see what things they should trim, what things they can trim, and don't wait for the problem to come about. If you can do something more efficiently, or you can do it with less employee headcount, now's the time to consider that and start saving some of that money. I've got clients who wrote out the last recession very well because they planned for it and they had the capital available to take advantage of opportunities to expand their market share when their competitors couldn't advertise. They didn't have the budget to advertise. They didn't have the budget to keep key employees, and they were able to capitalize on increasing their market share. And when that downturn was over, they were stronger.
So don't look at it as a threat, but actual, from the sounds of it, an opportunity.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, before we let go, is there any last parting words of wisdom and advice that you would like to leave behind? Well,
I tell clients all the time, and I tell prospects this especially, if you are not hearing from your CPA on a regular basis, at least a quarterly or semi-annually, on things that you might want to consider based on current tax rules, you're probably being underserved and you may want to look around. If you're happy with the surprise in April, that's fine, but I believe surprises are for your birthday, not April 15th.
Certainly. So how can our listeners find you?
They could search me on the internet, CPATarantino.com.
And how would they best be able to contact you?
Email, telephone, either one is fine. I'm responsive to both.
Right. And your email and address?
It's email is peter@CPATarantino.com. Tarantino is Tarantino.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, speaking of family businesses and business culture, we have John Waid with Corporate Culture Consulting. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
All right. Well, as I mentioned before with our first guest, let's kind of start with your origin story as to what got you into finding C3.
So I started working for large companies. My dad was in a large company, and I started from the ground up and worked for Frito-Lay and PepsiCo and worked at Nestle, and then ended up working at Chateau Saint Michel Winery out in Seattle, Washington, and was marketing director for them. When I turned 40, I figured out my passion. I got an opportunity to go interview for a job as a leadership trainer and consultant, and was a European company that gave me the opportunity to do this. I've been doing it for now 15 years, and about 8 years ago, I discovered that through the process of seeing a lot of different businesses and some of the opportunities and problems they were having. And almost all the problems didn't have to do with technical, things. It had to do with people. So 90% of problems in companies or opportunities in companies come from the people. And most of the leaders spend a lot of time on strategies and processes, and not a lot of time on the people part, not a lot of time on the behaviors, on the values. And so I looked up Corporate Culture Consulting to register it as a .com 8 years ago, and it was available. And I was surprised because you couldn't find a .com that had strategy written in it. You couldn't find a .com that had process in the word. Corporate Culture Consulting was available as a .com. I registered it, and I said, this is going to be a big industry someday. And it's not surprising that most people think of culture as something esoteric that doesn't have a lot of value. It's not kind of squishy. I was actually told on another radio show that it's like yogurt. It's kind of wet and squishy. And I said, yogurt's good for you. Culture's good for you. I said, you ought to think about, the saying that got me into this business is that's attributed to Peter Drucker, even though some people say he didn't say it, is culture eats strategy for breakfast. And the reason that's a very important quote is because if you think that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and you think of, let's just think of the Chick-fil-A, for instance, very successful chain of chicken stores. And if you think of Kentucky Fried Chicken and you think of Chick-fil-A, the only difference really between the two, they both have great processes. They both have great strategies for the chicken. They get you the chicken fast, and it's good. Both of them produce a good product. The difference between Chick-fil-A and Kentucky Fried Chicken is culture. It's the people and the values and the behaviors that you see at Chick-fil-A versus the values and the behaviors you see at Kentucky Fried Chicken. Mm-hmm. And let's just take that to the bottom line, because a lot of people say, oh, well, if you work on culture, it's not worth anything. I don't want to spend time. I want to spend time on my processes and systems. I say, okay, then you're going to leave $4 million on the table, because Kentucky Fried Chicken makes about $1 million per store. Chick-fil-A makes $5 million. So culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner at Chick-fil-A.
just not on Sundays.
Just not on Sundays. And even being closed on Sundays, they still make $5 million per store. So if you want to discover the secret of business, it's in the culture. Mm-hmm. And the culture is not that difficult if you narrow it down to what it is. It's values and behaviors. The really great companies know their values, and they know the behaviors that they're supposed to have, and they align them, and they work on them, daily. Mm-hmm. And if you go into Chick-fil-A and you say thank you to any person at Chick-fil-A, what are they going to say? It's my pleasure. Mm-hmm. It's my pleasure is the behavior that's been taught to them over the last 15 years. It actually took 4 years to install the "it's my pleasure" saying and the "it's my pleasure" attitude. And it actually came from the Ritz-Carlton here in Atlanta, because Truett Cathy was at the Ritz-Carlton. When he said thank you, one of the waiters said, "It's my pleasure, sir." And he said, I want everybody at Chick-fil-A to say "it's my pleasure." And I don't only want them to say it, I want them to mean it. Mm-hmm. So what is culture? It's a value like the "it's my pleasure" attitude or value that's exemplified every day at Chick-fil-A. It's their pleasure to serve you. That's really what they mean. They smile with teeth. They clean the bathrooms. They do all the things that most fast food restaurants. They care about the people. Truett would say, I'm not in the chicken business, I'm in the people business. Mm-hmm. And we need to, as companies, start getting back into the people business, because if you think that bad times are coming in the economy, and price and product have now been overtaken by service as the number one thing that people are looking for in a company, and every company from a family business or small company to a really large family business or company needs to pay attention to the service. And a lot of companies are calling us right now and saying, we want to be the first customer-centric company in our business sector. And I go, if you're not employee-centric, forget about being customer-centric. Because if your employees are unhappy or your employees don't know how to behave, they're not going to behave that way with the customers, and you're going to have a problem. So if you don't believe in having a behavior consultant come and talk to you, then just let it ride and see what happens. I mean, we've got huge disasters at companies that are happening because of their culture. Boeing is going through a huge problem right now because of culture. Oh, yeah. They had a pump the planes out culture, and their number one value at Boeing is safety. And, if safety is important, you need to live it every day. And if pump out the planes is your culture, then pump out the planes has some problems associated with it. Mm-hmm. So this is a serious subject that costs companies billions of dollars. And really, you need to get help. From a small business all the way to a large business. If you don't have a culture consultant or haven't thought of one, you might want to start calling us or calling somebody else who actually understands the subject, because it's a serious one.
So how does a business implement culture, or in their team, or just in their company in general?
Well, we have something called the Culture Challenge. So the Culture Challenge is basically two questions. What are your values? Mm. And it's like explaining the 401k program at the homeless shelter. That's the reaction that you end up getting from people is they don't know what the values are at their company. Uh-huh. So they stare at you. If you don't know the values at your company, then that's a problem. And if you don't know the values and live them through behaviors, that's a huge problem, because if you don't align the behaviors, then you have chaos. I say you either have culture or you have chaos. Mm-hmm. Most companies have chaos. So it's 3 values and some adjoining behaviors. What we do is we produce a manual. We produce a little booklet that shows you your values and your behaviors. And then we train those values and behaviors in the company till everybody's living them as a habit. Mm-hmm. And that's when you know you have a culture. And Southwest Airlines has 3 values, and everybody in the company knows them, and everybody lives them daily. Mm-hmm. And they have gone to great lengths and a lot of investment to make sure that as a low-cost airline, they have a great culture, because culture eats strategy for breakfast. They understand that's going to directly translate to their bottom line.
So what is kind of the key indicators as a management or a business owner that they would look for to find whether or not their company or their team has a culture that's purpose focused, or is it just, as you mentioned, chaos?
Well, if you have values on the wall and don't know what they are, that's a problem. So if you don't know the values at your company, you have a culture problem. If you don't have aligned behavior in your company, you have a culture problem. If you're not, living the daily behaviors that you're supposed to be living, that's a problem. So just tell me, if you can tell me what your values are and you live them every day, you're fine. I'll let you move on. If you don't, then you better call us, or you better call somebody who knows how to do this. Mm-hmm. And there's not a lot of people that know how to do this, because it is a soft thing that's taken me 15 years to figure it out. It's a huge opportunity, or it's a huge problem, and companies get to decide whether they want to make it an opportunity or they want to continue to see the problems associated. Most of the time when you have a culture problem, you're going to have morale issues, you're going to have retention issues, you're going to have loss of capital issues, you're going to have accidents, you're going to have all kinds of problems that if you were to go back and see what the cause of it is instead of the symptoms, it's a culture issue. Mm-hmm. So if you're a family business or any type of business, you need to figure out what your values are and the adjoining behaviors that you want for those values. And I recommend 3 because most people can't remember more than 3. Okay. And we actually have an operational value, we have a growth value, and we have an aspirational value. And we work with you on creating those 3 so they're unique to your business. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, if you're a family, if you're a mom or a dad and you don't have values for your kids, you might want to think about creating 3 values for your kids: an operational value, a growth value, and an aspirational value. For my family, we have fun as our aspirational value. We have do your homework as you're getting better. Our growth value is make sure you're prepared and do your homework. Mm-hmm. And then we also have safety as our value. That's our operational value. If we don't operate with safety, we're not alive. Mm-hmm. If you think about the values of this country, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, life is your operational value. Liberty is your growth value, because with liberty, you can get better and grow. And then pursuit of happiness, that's your aspirational value. Mm-hmm. So those are huge. This country, the United States, was founded on those 3 values. Our Constitution's based on those 3 values. And it's what's made this country really, really special and really, really great, because we're a values-based country that operates, with those values in mind. So every decision you make in a company ought to be based on those values and the adjoining behaviors, and then the decisions become easy. For instance, Aflac fired Gilbert Gottfried in about an hour after he made a bad joke about Japan after the earthquake and tsunami. It took him an hour because they just said he insulted our biggest customer, and we don't, that's not part of our value system. So he's fired. And that's why the Aflac duck had to go through rehabilitation, and they actually brought in a new duck, and they had a contest to have the new voice of the Aflac duck. So somebody else made a few $1 million a year being the Aflac duck. And so Gilbert Gottfried lost his job because he violated their culture.
So when talking about values, it sounds like you're not just preaching it, you're also living it for yourself, family-wise.
Yeah.
And you're also bringing it back into kind of the founder of the country where, for me, from an outside looking observer looking in, it sounds like you're also advocating kind of a bill of rights per se, or just a constitution or value-based foundation for business.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the 10 Commandments as the foundation for some religions, if you look at the 3 values of our Constitution, if you look at the Roman system, they had 3 values. They believed that everything should be utilitarian. You should be able to use it. It should be strong so it lasts a long time, and it should be beautiful. Those are their 3 values, and everything they did was in accordance with those 3 values. And that civilization lasted for a long, long time until they went away from those values, and then it got weak. So yeah, you need to have, you need to have a Bible for your business, and we call it the little culture book. And we create culture books for companies, and we help you through training and development. We help you to live your culture, from everything from a company with 2 people, everything all the way up to, millions of employees.
Which leads to the next question. How and why is a culture tied directly to leaderships, particularly for family businesses?
So the number one job of the leader is not to work on processes and strategies. It's to work on the culture. It's to work on the behavior of your people. Because if you leave a good, again, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So if you work on the values and the behaviors, those values and behaviors will help you to develop a good process. They'll also help you to develop a good strategy. If you look at Chick-fil-A, if you look at Southwest Airlines, they started with the culture, then they worked their way into the structure or the processes, and then they worked themselves into strategy. So they make a mean chicken sandwich. It's based on their values. It's based on, providing the values of working together and producing an excellent quality. Quality is one of their values. So if you start with the culture, then you work on the processes, then you work on the strategy. First start with your employees, then go to the customer, and then you get the money. We start with money first, then we go to the customers because the customers bring us money. And then as an afterthought, we think of the employees or our team members. So start with the team members, work on their behaviors, work on their values, and then work your way into the processes, and then work your way into the money. And you'll have a lot more money.
Well, before we end here, what is one tidbit or advice that you would like for people listening to at least take away from?
If you don't know your values, start to learn them and start to develop them. And if you have 10 of them, get to 3. And if you have 3 of them and they're balanced, start training and developing them, and then actually live them. And if you do that, you'll be surprised that through good times and bad, values will last. That's your ultimate competitive advantage, is to have a culture based on values and behaviors and that'll last through the generations, just like with your family. The greatest gift I can give my daughter is those 3 values, because I'm not going to be with her as she's growing up in the next few years, because she's 17 and she's off to college. I'm not going to be with her, but those values will be with her, and the adjoining behaviors, and I trust that she will do well.
Great. Well, how does someone now listen to all this, kind of a red light bulb goes off in their head and go, I probably need some help with my values or chaos I have running. How do they best find you?
If you have chaos or you have culture and you want to even make it better, you can reach me at jwaid@corporatecultureconsulting.com. So jwaid@corporatecultureconsulting.com. You can also reach me at 404-915-3051, or you can visit us on our website, C3-Culture.com.
Well, thank you, John.
Thank you.
Well, this show is sponsored and brought to you by yours truly, Anthony Chen with Lighthouse Financial Network. Securities and advisory services offered through Royal Alliance Associates, RAA member FINRA SIPC. RAA is separately owned, and other entities and or marketing names, products, or services referred here are independent of RAA. The main office address is 575 Broad Hollow Road, Melville, New York, 11747. You can best reach me at 631-465-9090 at extension 5075, or best by email at Anthony Chen, CHEN, at lfnllc.com. Thank you for listening. Catch you all next time. Thank you again for listening to Family Business Radio.